getting started with n8n, a complete beginner's guide. We're going to jump into n8n for the first time. If you've never used it before, we're going to learn what n8n is very quickly. Why use n8n? In this case, there may be some other software that would make more sense, but we just want a basic flow to kind of get you into the mindset of using an automation platform. We're going to build a LinkedIn content bank as our sample to begin with. And then we're going to hopefully along the way learn to think a little bit more in terms of automation. So first of all, what is n8n? It is a workflow automation platform. It's been blown up a lot in the AI and automation space right now. It's very similar to something like Make.com or Zapier. But I think the big advantage here is definitely the flow, the flexibility in the flow. So Make.com and Zapier tend to be much more sequential, but n8n gives you a little bit more freedom as far as being able to branch off into different options, which is very powerful. But the other thing I think that's really been a big reason for why this has gotten so popular is the pricing is not bad. So $24 a month, obviously cheaper if you go annual, is pretty good. $60 a month for unlimited. But the big thing I think that also helps a ton is the community edition. So you can actually run it for free just on your computer if you wanted. But it's open source. So you have full access to the code. So you not only can run it on your computer, you could actually run it in the cloud. So you can go and run your own version in Docker and then, or upload a Docker image to AWS and run it for compute costs in AWS, which is actually very, very cost effective depending on how much you're doing. So that's a big reason I think why this has gotten really popular lately. But yeah, if you're looking to jump into it, let's get started. We'll trust that you can sign in to the website. Not too difficult there. I've already signed up, so hopefully you can do that. But when you first sign in and you've already paid for a plan, that's probably what would end up happening. You can't get started for free, so you can remember to cancel after 14 days or whatever if you don't want to pay for it. But you should end up on something like this. Nothing too fancy here. Manage to be able to change your subscription, and then yeah, otherwise you'll have a workspace that we can get started with. So 0 executions, 0 active flows. So this is brand new, hopefully just like what you would be seeing. So I'm going to go ahead and open my workspace. And it should load up here in just a minute. Okay. Now, I have played around in here a little bit, but I really haven't done too much yet. So this is actually still relatively new. For a quick background, I'm actually a software engineer, so I know how to write the code, but I really like these platforms like Make and Zapier and now n8n because it saves you a lot of time where you don't have to rewrite a bunch of code that doesn't need to be rewritten, especially when you're trying to connect to apps. That's a huge advantage. That's something I'm actually going to point out. That's where these tools become really, really powerful, is being able to connect to all these apps. So they've got at least 400 integrations. Make.com has something like 5,000, which just makes it so much easier where you don't have to write a bunch of code to try to connect those things together. They're already pre-connected and you can just connect them up through different nodes. So anyway, so I am jumping into those kind of for the first time. So I'll be learning along with you at this point. So let's start from scratch. Okay, so once logged in, this is a blank workflow. So you'll notice up at the top, you have my workflow. So I had mentioned the LinkedIn content bank. So let's do something like that. So we'll say LinkedIn content poster. All right, now you have a name for your flow. There's not too much else you need to do up here. Mostly taking note that this is currently inactive. Obviously, there's nothing here, so it can't be active yet, but this is where you would turn it on once you've set it up and you're sure that it's going to do what you want it to do. If you wanted to share, okay, you would give access to somebody else. It should automatically save. So as you're working on it, it's just going to keep saving any kind of changes you make. What's nice here is that you can probably actually go back, and if you have made changes and those changes didn't actually end up working, you can go back to the previous version, which is nice for when you decide to do something else or something isn't working as you expected. Once you start, building more workflows that are similar and you want to use maybe like a template or something like that, you can duplicate some of the work you've already done. You can download it. So once you build a nice flow, you can create a template out of that and download that. And then on the flip side, be able to import one either from a URL, which is nice, or from a file. So usually like a JSON file. Settings wise, I don't think there's too much to do here. This mostly I think default settings are fine. Not really much to need to change there. So then you have the open canvas here. So this is where we're going to add all of the nodes. So we obviously need to start somewhere, need some sort of trigger or something for something to happen. So let's add our first step. Triggers are really the core functionality for something like an automation platform. Well, you need a way to, some sort of condition to be met to decide that, okay, we need to do something now. So cause and effect, essentially. In this case, trigger manually, that's usually going to be mostly for testing, or yeah, for something that, I guess, as I said, getting started quickly. It could be that you still have like a semi-manual process and you don't want this thing running all the time. So it might be something like uploading some data somewhere else and then coming in here when you just every once in a while need to go and scan that data. You could just kick off a trigger manually. But probably where most things are going to happen is either like on an app event. So something happens in Notion or Airtable or something like that. Like a new row is added, like Google Sheets. And then schedule is not bad. I think we're going to start with schedule here because that would make the most sense as far as simplicity, just trying to understand how this would work. But scheduling is something to definitely be careful of as well, because depending on how you schedule it, it could be a little bit inefficient. So it'd just be something we want to watch out for. Webhooks will be really nice. That's probably a little more advanced way to trigger things how you want them to trigger. But we'll get into that later. Form submission is nice. I think n8n actually provides you with a form, which is really nice. So you don't have to go sign up for something like Typeform or anything like that. You can actually create one through n8n. So that may be useful in the future. And then, yeah, there we go. When called by another workflow, now you start getting into really complicated things where you're having workflows that trigger other workflows. And I'm sure we'll get to that later. So first, though, what I'm thinking for this content bank is that we're going to do on a schedule. So, you need to be posting your content at least, 3 times a day. We're going to start with once a day, keep it simple, just so it's a little bit easier to follow. So for this schedule trigger, this is going to be once a day. So let's do days between triggered, just one. So we're going to do it every day. We could get into fancier, like don't post on weekends kind of thing, but no need for that. We'll just stick with one a day for now. What time do we want it to trigger? Let's do, let's see. I'm technically in Central Time, but I'm thinking lunchtime Pacific. So 2 p.m. is probably a good time. Also 2 p.m., 3 p.m. starting to get to the end of the day for people when they're starting to check their phones, when they're getting bored at work. And trigger at minute 0. So I guess that was if you wanted to do at 2:30, you would add your minutes here. So let's add that rule. Oh, actually, no, wait. Don't need a rule. Oh, that's an extra rule. Never mind. We don't need that. Cool. So I think that's really it for this. So back to Canvas. Now we have a scheduled trigger. So this should trigger at 2 p.m. every day. In this case, I think there's not too much we can do here, so we can test workflow. I think, yeah, it'll kick it off for you, just to say that like this is what would have happened if it actually had been 2 p.m. It is not yet, as you can probably see on my computer. But at 2 p.m., this workflow would start. So first thing is covered. We now have a trigger for the flow. So the next thing now is action in an app. So I think what we want to do is read from a content bank. So this is where we start to see a little bit more of the power of the automation platform in being able to connect these apps together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Google Drive and I'm going to create a Google Sheet. We're going to say this is linked in content bank. And I'm going to kind of come up with some details just for now. We'll give it an ID, just for reference later. Keep it simple. Content, and then status, and yeah, that should be enough for now. Enough to have an idea of what we're posting and when, and if it's posted or not. So awesome. I think that's really all we need then. So now we'll go back to n8n. I pre-prepared a little bit here when I created a content bank, but now we're going to connect to it. So now we have our scheduled trigger. So once a day, we're going to go and do something. That something would be, we're going to connect to Google Sheets. And actually, let me go back to that a little bit. So action in an app, that's where we're probably going to spend most of our time, is connecting up to other apps like Google Sheets, Telegram, Notion, and doing other things in the workflow. Data transformation, it's really nice. I'm glad they have this built in. It's probably for really simple. So like they say, manipulate, filter, or convert data. we'll get into that later. It's probably more so like converting from XML to JSON and that kind of thing. Flow, branch, merge, loop. That was something I mentioned before, being able to control what happens next. And if you get into more complicated situations, you can actually flow to different nodes, which would be really helpful. Core, being able to run code, and then, more programming kind of stuff. And then, of course, AI, which we will get back to. Interesting. And then you could also trigger another workflow. So one trigger into another trigger. But for now, most of the time, you're probably going to be actions in an app. So this is where you have connected up to, the 400 different app integrations that are possible. In this case, we are looking for Google Sheets. So we're going to connect to Google Sheets. And then you have some options as far as actions you can take within Google Sheets. So you can create a spreadsheet, we can delete a spreadsheet, we can append or update rows in the sheet, add new rows, clear it, create a sheet, delete a sheet. In this case, what we are going to do is get a row in the sheet. Okay, so this is kind of your interface for the Google Sheets node. You're going to have your input data on the left, so stuff that's coming in. In this case, it's coming from basically usually whatever the last node was. So in this case, it's the scheduled trigger. So we ran it at noon. It actually would have been, 2 p.m. because that's what we set the conditions for. But since we're testing, it's going off of what we just ran it with. So that's the data that we can use to refer to in this Google Sheets node. But first, we need to actually connect to Google Sheets. So credential to connect with. So we're going to create a new credential. Auth 2 recommended, absolutely. Nothing to do there except sign in. So we're going to sign in with Google. Then it should pop up and say, hey, we're going to use your Google account to connect to n8n. say, okay, sure. I'm going to continue. All right. Connection successful. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Cool. Account connected. If anything, in the future, you may need to come back in, but I think this account should stay here. If you happen to have multiple accounts, then you could probably come in here and rename them. But in this case, we now have a Google Sheets account connected. If you wanted to switch or something like that, add a new one, you can always come back in and change this. But this Google Sheets account will now stay for your account, your n8n account, not for this flow specifically. So when you go build another flow, you won't have to do this again. Google Sheets is already connected. Okay, in this case, we're going to do sheet within document. Yeah, that sounds about right. And we're going to get rows. And okay, nice. And so we already picked get rows when we were looking for actions, but I guess you could actually come in here and change the node itself to be something else. So okay, so from list would work. If you have the URL or by ID, I guess that works too. So for example purposes, let's go ahead and do from list. So what's probably going to do is, there we go. Yep, it's going to go and just find all the documents that are already in your Google Drive and probably it looks like sorting probably by most recent. So I already created a document called LinkedIn Content Bank. So go ahead and connect to that. And then from list of sheets. So sheet, this is I always forget this, but sheet just means like basically the tab for this sheet, because you could have multiple sheets within a Google Sheet document. So I'm just going to do sheet 1. Now there are 2 sheets, but we're going to stick with sheet 1. Okay. And then currently there's no filters. So that actually is probably why I added the status column, because in this case, what we probably actually want to do is do a filter for status. So I named the column status, right? This column here. So now I can select that column. And this is where it's going to be a little bit more powerful. We're going to say column must have value. So in this case, we want the column to have value of post, or let's see, we need some simple statuses, right? So published would be, we've already sent it. But in this case, we'll say waiting. So status should be waiting. And that should do it, basically. Because what we're going to do is just let it go down the spreadsheet, and it's just going to look for the next one that has not been posted, and then it's going to post it. So that should be simple enough for now. We're going to set the status of waiting. So it's going to get the next column in the spreadsheet that says waiting. Okay. And I think that's basically it at this point. So let's go ahead and test setup, right? So we are connected to Google Sheets. We're connected to the sheet that we want to be pulling data from, the proper sheet, actually sheet 1. We are looking for a column with status of waiting. And actually, let's put some extra data in here. So say 1, we're going to say n8n is awesome. It's a real value post right there. Okay. Now this should be able to pull that data in. So we're going to say test setup. And there we go. That's our data. So in row number, not to be confused, right? The row number is going to be what the actual row number is in Google Sheets, but we are using our own proprietary ID. This could be anything. We're just starting with one here. So just don't let that trip you up in the future. But it was able to find what we were looking for, and that's because waiting was the status. If we just said published, so let's change this real quick. Say look for published, and then test that up. No data returned because this is not published. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to go with waiting for now. Test that setup again, and now it should find it again. There we go. Cool. So now at 2 p.m. every day, we're going to come in and read the Google Sheets document, and we're going to grab the first row. So we're looking for rows with a status of waiting. Awesome. So now the next step is to post it. So another action in app, and we're going to say LinkedIn. And create a post is our only option. So it looks like that's what we're going to do. Okay. And then let's connect. So same thing. We need to create a credential. So we have to connect to LinkedIn. So this is where you'd actually connect with your LinkedIn account. So we're going to go ahead and connect my account. I think I tested this a little bit earlier. I don't think we want organization support. Yeah, request permissions to post as an organization. Unless you are an organization, then of course you probably want that. If you are not, if you're just posting under a personal account, then you definitely want to make sure that that's not selected, because I think that will cause an issue. But I am going to connect my account. So you would ask you to log in under your LinkedIn profile and sign in with password. And there we go. Connection successful. So now my LinkedIn account is now connected to n8n as well. So we're good to go there. Go ahead and close that. Cool. So LinkedIn account. And what we're going to do is, resource, operation, create. Cool. So we're going to post as person. And then, and again, if you're an organization, then that you would have enabled the organization option. In this case, we're just a person. And let's see. Person must be from the list or specified from using ID. Okay, cool. So post as person. Might need a second to reload because I believe we should be able to. There we go. All right. So if you run into something, you can just refresh the list here with these triple dots. And there we go. I can person name or ID. I can now do my name and the text. So now, like I mentioned before, basically this is going to show on the left your inputs. So it's going to show all the data that you have available from the past. So previously when we were looking at Google Sheets, it only showed you the data from schedule trigger, because that's the only thing basically to the left of it that's connected to it. But in this case, now that we're on the LinkedIn node and it has connections to Google Sheets and schedule trigger, you now can pull data from both of them. So in this case, like I pointed out before, we have the row number from Google Sheets because that's the row that we found that matched our status. So now we can use content as our text. Boom. And hopefully that's not too scary. Just a way for it to say, okay, it's going to grab JSON. So JSON is usually the data format that's used to communicate between these nodes. So it's going to say JSON.content, and that's exactly what is pulled over here. I just grabbed the content node from the Google Sheets data and pulled it into text. So, and it's already read, and is awesome. So that is what it's going to post on LinkedIn. Media category, none in this case. I guess if you were doing something else, you could do an article or you could do an image. We're going to not do that for now. Just a boring content post for now. But that should be it. So at this point, there's really nothing else to do. Don't need to add any other fields or anything like that because we have everything we need. No other settings that we really need. I guess you could change some of these flows, but we're not going to get into that now. But at this point, I think this is good to go. So I'm going to test this. It's going to show up on LinkedIn, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete it after it does that. So here we go. I'm going to hit test setup. There we go. And it returns some data back from LinkedIn. Not super helpful. I'm going to switch over to LinkedIn though and see what it looks like. Okay, then now I'm back over to LinkedIn, and as you can see, I posted this just now from there. n8n is awesome. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that because it's just a test post. Successfully posted to LinkedIn from n8n based on content in a Google Sheet. Now we're almost done. We are pulling content from the database, or the data bank rather, and posting it to LinkedIn. But the problem is that we are matching on the status of waiting. So if we were to finish it now, the schedule's just going to reschedule. It's going to trigger tomorrow at 2 p.m. It's going to grab this Google Sheet again. It's going to come in here and look for a column with the status of waiting, and it's going to post it to LinkedIn. So it would repost what we just did because that status hasn't changed. So we need to finish up this flow by adding one more setting. And what we're going to do is go back into Google Sheets. So let's add an action, Google Sheets. And in this case, what we're going to do is update. So we're going to update the row. Now we're already still connected to Google Sheets. And then now we actually have a bunch of inputs, right? Because now we have the schedule trigger first, then we had the Google Sheets, and then we had the LinkedIn info. Obviously, this LinkedIn info is not super helpful, but we don't really need it. In this case, though, we already have connected to the Google Sheets doc originally. So we know which row we modified because we pulled in the one that was status of waiting. So what we can do is we can go back to from list. So we can grab our LinkedIn content bank document again, and then we're just working off of sheet 1. So we'll connect to that. And then what it's going to do is map column mode. Okay, so map each column manually. In that case, it's just saying it's keeping track of, we have these columns with names, ID, content, status. So n8n should automatically read that, which is nice. There we go. So what we can do is we could match on row number. So rather than trying to go find something else, it's just easiest to use row number, which we already have available. So let's go ahead and drag row number in here. Cool. So what it's going to do is go find row number 2 in the spreadsheet. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update status to published. We don't need to change anything else. That's the only thing that matters. And that's it. So in this case, there's nothing else we need to fill out. So that should be it. It should go find row number 2, and it should find the column of status, and it should update that to published. So let's go ahead and test that. Okay, so row number 2, status is updated to published. So let's go verify. And there we go. It was waiting. Now it's published. So awesome. So now the next time that we run this, it's going to look for the next row that is waiting. Next best post. In this case, it would be waiting. So back in n8n, this part's done. So we can click out of this node. And that's pretty much it for the flow. So just to go back and verify though, let's go ahead and just run this one. So again, this is triggering at 2 p.m. every day. But this one, we're going to go ahead and test it. So again, it's looking for a value of waiting. So what it should do is skip past published and go to the next one that's waiting. Let's go ahead and test setup. And there we go. Next best post. ID number 2 is status waiting. So now that will prevent us from continually posting the same thing over and over because it has the status of waiting still. So awesome. That's pretty much it for this then. It's your first simple flow. Hopefully kind of gives you an idea of what n8n is and how it works. But basically just trying to show a simple way to get things started and be able to kind of understand how these workflows work. I guess we should probably go ahead and do one full test workflow just to be able to show that it actually works all the way through. We tested that it's still pulling the correct values, but let's do one end to end without manually testing in between. So let's go ahead and test the workflow. Again, this would trigger at 2 p.m. So we're going to say it's 2 p.m. now. Let's go ahead and test. So it should read the document, post to LinkedIn, update the status. So we'll verify. There we go. The status is updated and published. And then I will go hop over to LinkedIn real quick. Okay, and back on my LinkedIn, the next best post is now. So successfully posted. I'm going to go ahead, delete this, super valuable content. And there we go. So that was actually successfully posted. Create a content bank here. You can just fill this out with as many as you want, and it would just run once a day and go ahead and post that content off to LinkedIn. This is a complete beginner's guide to n8n, building your first simple workflow. Nothing fancy. There's obviously plenty of room, plenty of power here to be able to take advantage of, but this is really just to kind of get started, get used to the n8n workflow, and do something simple that's easy to grasp. There's plenty more to get into as far as AI assistance and that kind of thing. So I will be creating a lot more videos about that in the future. I'm also considering creating a community. So if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know. But in the meantime, I will be creating way more tutorials like this, getting into much more advanced stuff. So if you have any questions or any things you would like to see, please let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.